you don't build a very strong character if you're constantly reasonable and listening to other points of view.
Who is Timandra Harkness? Science, comedy, and broadcasting may seem an unlikely career combination, but it's made her quite possibly one of the most intriguing voices in UK media. A distinguished broadcaster, presenting BBC series like Future Proofing and Steel Manning. Her work often explores how our society is intertwined with science. Her recently released second book, Technology is Not the Problem, builds on her last book, asking the question, why do we still give our data away even though we know the risk? Beyond her literary and broadcasting pursuits, Timandra pioneers a unique form of science comedy, performing at events like the Edinburgh Fringe. Join us as we uncover and insights behind Timandra's captivating career. First of all, Timandra, how do you describe your job?
Okay, well, I mean, that's already quite a hard question because it slightly depends who I'm talking to. I would normally say writer and presenter because that is loose enough to encompass what I do, because I do written journalism and also books, but I also present some radio and also live events. I do quite a lot of chairing and speaking at live events. So that Venn diagram kind of includes it, and then sometimes I throw in lapsed comedian.
Yes. Talk to us about the lapsed comedian, because I thought that was... I remember when we did Times Radio together, I went on your website and saw that phrase and it really stuck with me.
Well, it's because if somebody says comedian, they expect me to turn out and just do loads of jokes and be really funny. And I haven't done like proper stand-up comedy gigs for years and years and years. I mean, well over 10 years. I do occasionally, the itch gets me and I put together a show and take it to the Edinburgh Fringe. And then that usually does me for a few years. I remembered how hard it is and how easy it is to lose money. But in that sense, so it's like it's something I have done and I would never say I'll never do it again. But I'm not really doing it now. But I do think it's like other things that you lapse. I'm not an ex-comedian because there is always something there. You know, I will always go, there's a pun there and somebody has to make it. And if that somebody is me, so be it.
But you're also a scientist as well, right? So this is quite an unusual sort of combination of, broadcaster, scientist, comedian.
I think the most unusual thing about me is that I came to the science, and strictly speaking, I'm a statistician. I have got a BSc, but it's in maths and stats.
Yeah.
But I came to that really almost through the comedy, whereas there are other people out there who do comedy science, and they mostly started with the science and then realised they could be funny with it.
Yes.
And in fact, that was kind of what happened. I was doing stand-up, and then I was also doing bits of journalism, and I rocked up to the Royal Society for a 2-day meeting on stem cell research, as you do, hoping there might be some story there, and really barely keeping up with what they were talking about. And then in the coffee break, I bumped into someone I knew off the stand-up comedy circuit, looking really smart in a suit. And so I sidled up to her and went, "What are you doing here, Helen Pilcher?" And she went, "I'm a stem cell scientist. That's my day job. What are you doing here?" Slightly furtive, like, didn't recognise you with your smart clothes on kind of way. And so we started the UK's first ever comedy science double act. And, quite a few people are doing it now, but I do think we were the first in this country. But she absolutely was literally a working experimental scientist doing stuff with neuroscience and brain scans and stem cells. And I was like science curious. And we met, and we brought it together in the comedy. But then that made me kind of realise how much I missed maths especially and science, and so then I went back and studied with the Open University and did the maths and stats degree.
So you did that a bit later on then?
Yeah, that was I already had a humanities degree.
Okay. What inspired you? Because normally stats and things is that you're sort of good at it, or it's not a passion that comes to people later in life generally.
Well, I did like it at school.
Okay.
I did A-level maths. And oddly enough, our school put us through the maths GCSE early, and so we snuck in a stats GCSE as well, like as a bonus. Right. So it was quite a good maths school, and I always liked maths. I liked it at primary school and everything, but it didn't really fit into what I wanted to be doing. Especially, it was just something I enjoyed. And so I guess I had a midlife crisis.
I realised.
I guess I was watching Marcus de Sotoy on television talking about the history of maths and going, I like this series, but I wish there was more maths in it.
Yeah.
And then it was like a self-revelation. I went, yeah, maybe I should just go and study some maths again, and just. And it really was midlife crisis time. I was newly out of quite a long relationship, so I had some extra spare time, and so I looked at the Open University, and at that point you could just like do the odd course.
Yeah.
So I did a course, and then the next year I did another course, and then they said the fee structure is changing, the fees are going to triple unless you are already working towards a degree with us.
Right.
So then I went, oh well, okay, yeah, why not then? It's better than paying triple fees. So
Yeah.
So that's how I ended up with a 2-2 in maths and stats.
I love that.
Started off just for kicks, and then now here I am on the Council of the Royal Statistical Society. So watch out, kids. You think it's a little bit of algebra, and who knows where it can lead.
What do you think of, I mean, by the time this is published, he probably won't be Prime Minister anymore, but Rishi Sunak's like focus on mathematics has been quite like, everyone's got to do it to 18, etc. What do you think of it?
See, I think that's a mistake, because all that will happen is people who don't like maths and find it hard are going to be forced to sit in lessons they hate once or twice a week. And although I don't think it's something that only people who really love it should do, I mean, because at some level it's a basic life skill to be able to look at your, well, I mean, no, not that we ever look at our change anymore, but look at your electricity bill and say, is this right, and that kind of thing. And look at inflation figures and go, what does this mean? How should I vote? But so I think kind of a certain basic level of functional maths is important for everyone. But I think the way that you get people to appreciate it more than that is not to just force everyone to do it.
Yeah.
I think you'd do much better to say, okay, everybody needs like GCSE level just to function, but after that, how can we make people love it?
Yeah.
How can we say, actually, it's not all about percentages and equations. If you look at a map of the world and say, how many colours of ink would we need to print this map so that no adjoining countries are the same colour as any of the countries adjoining them?
Yes.
You know what I mean? So every country is a different colour from all the countries that touch its borders.
Yeah.
How many colours of ink would you need for that? That's a maths question, and there is actually a theorem about it, and they're trying to prove that they know that you can do it with 4. There is no map in the world that you need more than 4 colours for. And that's maths. And so maths is full of these other glorious things that you don't actually think of when you're at school and you're trying to get the sums right. But actually there's all these beautiful patterns. It's about finding patterns in the world.
That's a great way of kind of describing it and thinking about it, though. I mean, do you think this? I mean, one of my things with it is that our media is quite dominated by sort of humanities graduates on the whole. Like I think of it more generally in the traditional. I don't think the British media is that interested in business and doesn't cover business enough. Is that's my shtick. But actually, like I can see from that side of it as well. Like I've just never heard it kind of explained like that. Actually.
No, and I think most of us don't at school either.
Yeah.
I think I was partly quite lucky that I went to such a tiny primary school that basically the deal was they would give you books for whatever subject and you'd work your way through. When you got stuck, you'd queue up to ask the teacher. There were literally like 60 kids from 5 to 11, the whole school. And so because I quite liked maths, I worked through the maths books quite quickly. Yeah. And then the teacher went, you've finished all the maths books. Okay, well, I'll see what else is out there. And she sent off for these maths books that were meant to be first year secondary that had all sorts of fascinating stuff like binary numbers and matrices and stuff, which obviously we hadn't done at primary school. And I was like, this is really interesting. So I had right from the start this sense that there's really interesting, intriguing little puzzles and problems and new ways of looking at the world. And I think a lot of people don't get that. I think a lot of people, the teachers are just trying to get them through the exams.
Yes.
And go, please learn this, please memorise this way of crunching these numbers to get this. And I mean, I know it sounds funny to say it takes the joy out of it, and I know that it's a kind of minority interest, but there are interesting things in it that we don't tend to encounter at school.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's really really true. It's a very interesting way of thinking about it. And you've written books on data, and data visualization as well has become it's become mini industry in its own right in the last 20 years or so, right?
Yeah. That was interesting. That was the thing that first drew me kind of away from the pure maths for fun and towards the stats. Because there was this thing, you probably remember, it probably is getting on for 20 years ago now, where suddenly everyone got very excited about stats and data visualization. All the newspapers were full of pie charts and everything, and everyone was getting very excited about it. And I thought, well, this is odd, because I like this, but I like maths. And I know all of you, my friends, fear maths because you keep telling me so. And yet you love these pie charts. So what's going on here? What is it about seeing a nice, like 2 decimal places number on the front of the Guardian that makes you feel so happy? And I decided there was a cultural thing going on, that people wanted an element of certainty, which is quite fictitious. I mean, honestly, if you see a number in a newspaper that has 2 decimal places, it's almost certainly bogus. I don't mean it's completely made up. I mean that it's giving you a completely fictitious air of precision that is almost certainly not warranted. Because as soon as you're talking about, big numbers in the economy or whatever, it's you can't actually be that precise.
Yeah.
So anyway, I got interested. I thought, why are people so into stats all of a sudden? I think it is this cultural urge for certainty and predictability in an unpredictable world. And then people start talking about big data, and I was like, okay, so is this more of the same, or is this actually something that is quite exciting, genuinely? And the maths bit of me went, oh, I wonder what you could do with all this data. And so that was when I really started getting into that. And I decided in the end it was a bit of both. There was still that cultural thing of, we want answers, we want predictability. We don't understand big data, so it must be very clever. So it's going to give us all the answers. But also, genuinely, you can do amazing things with it, although not necessarily the things we have been doing. But, there is actually loads of potential in it.
The latest book, give us a title of it.
Technology is not the problem.
Exactly. I loved it, thought it was fascinating, partly because it gives an optimistic argument for technology, particularly the final chapter around like how in the pandemic it connected so much of us. And you think about, again, if the pandemic had happened 30 years earlier, how hard it would have been for a number of people. But the thing that I was particularly interested in was status. And you talk a lot about that basically it's humans wanting to project their status onto the world like all the time is basically the problem, not technology that's facilitating that, right? And it's my thing for why I always think jobs will exist, and I know Elon Musk says there won't be any, but people will always want status. And actually it's probably, particularly in your kind of like formative years, in your 20s, it's probably the quickest way of being able to develop status, basically, is via somebody's career.
I wouldn't put it quite like that. I mean, the word I use rather than status is identity. And although I get what you mean, that it's that both of them are about, this is who I am, and this is who I am in relation to the rest of you.
Yes.
So in that sense, yes. I mean, I do think identity is like a social relationship between people. So when you say this is who I am, you're not just like, if I had been born on a distant planet and was the only person in the universe, this would still be who I am. You're also saying, this is who I am, this is how I want all of you to respond to me and treat me.
Yes.
So in that sense, it does overlap with status, but I think it's a bit more muddy and complicated than that. And that's one of the reasons why we find it very tricky, and we look to the technology to constantly reassure us about who we are, because we feel a bit insecure and doubtful about who we are. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It's just it's making me think about when I read it. almost instantly converted it into what I thought, which is the kind of,
So you're a human being.
yeah, exactly. It's like our classic. She means by identity and status. No,
What
but
she means is exactly what I mean.
well, exactly what I think. That's why I enjoyed it so much. But what was the trigger for writing the book then in this instance?
Well, oddly, I kind of started out in a slightly different direction, because the first book, Big Data Does Size Matter, was much more about like, here's this thing, big data, you've heard the phrase, you're not really sure what it means, but you feel it's important, so I'm going to explain to you right from what is data, right from the basics. Here's how it works, here's how people are using it, here's some of the issues like privacy and control. And out of that, one of the things that came out was the way that our data is collected and used to profile us and target us with things. And I was really interested in that, because again, it seemed to be partly a social phenomenon that everything is personalised now. And if we think of our grandparents' generation as living in the mass society, now you could talk about us in the personalised society. So the way I got here today, when I first moved to London, 20 odd years ago, I would have had an A to Z, I would have had a tube map, and I would have used those to put together my own route.
Yeah.
Using the same resources as everybody else. But obviously I didn't do that now. I had a travel app, and I said, this is where I need to be, this is where I am. In fact, I'll give you my location so you can tell me if I'm going wrong. And it gave me a personalised route that only gave me the information that I needed. And so that was what intrigued me. It's like, okay, so how do we get from everyone gets the same to everyone gets a personalised thing because of the data gathering technology? But the more I looked at it, the more I thought, I'm actually less interested in how, and I'm more interested in why. Why is this the technology that we've got rather than any other kind? There must be something about us that means that at the same time as going, oh, it's a bit creepy and is my phone listening to me, we actually keep going back and going back. And if it's not personalised enough, we go, this is an outrage. Why am I being shown adverts for Aston Villa shirts when my avatar is wearing a Liverpool FC hat?
There were two things that I thought about in the book, like when you said like knowing buses and bus routes kind of like marked you out as like a proper Londoner. That made me smile. And I thought back to when I came to London. I used to start by printing out the directions on Google Maps. So that was how sort of I kind of like did it. If you were meeting with a friend and so on. But the other point that stuck with me as well that you made was like you don't remember when you stopped taking your A to Z. And likewise, I can't remember when I stopped printing things out. But actually, it's such a... You would think that as kind of like humans, we would sort of remember quite a seismic moment. I remember once remarking to my parents, it's quite strange I leave the house and I don't know where I'm going. Because I know that I can check the party address on Facebook or email, and then I can stick it in my phone, all in the sort of 3-minute walk to the tube and get a route and sort of... and I remember them thinking, God, that's quite strange, like when you say it like that. But of course, that's it. But you don't remember because it's such a lot of the time it's incremental steps, I suppose, as well, right?
Well, yes, but it is weird how it's transformational, and yet we're kind of not aware really as it happens. I mean, just think about social life. Before we all had a mobile phone, if you arranged to meet somebody somewhere, you really pretty much had to be there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they wouldn't know what had happened to you or where you were or if you were going to turn up. Whereas now it's very normal to go, well, I'll call you when I'm on my way, or I'll text you, or I'll show you, I'll share my location so you can actually track where I am.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that has made social life, I think, much more provisional and contingent in the sense that we can improvise it as we go.
Yeah, and I will confirm close to the date, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, till the morning. Yeah, I think that's really really true. So what were the other things in the book? So it's about identity rather than status. I've been correct on that. But I think it's...
But there is an overlap, you see, because I think status is also about who you are in the eyes of other people.
Yeah.
And that affects how you feel about yourself. And I think identity is a lot about that. But the weird thing about identity is it's so often talked about as if it's something that's innate and it's kind of inner kernel of yourself.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, is this the real Timandra, the authentic Timandra? And yet, you would think if it was just that I wouldn't care if other people got me wrong or, you know, didn't treat me the way that I thought I should be treated, because I could go, but it's all right because I know who I am. But actually, it doesn't work like that at all. It's very much like if people don't treat you the way you want to be treated, you really think, my self is under attack. People talk about being unpersoned.
Yeah.
If they're seen wrongly by other people, as if being a person is something that really depends on how others see you. So in that sense, I think, you know, status is not completely wrong as a way of seeing it. It's just that we tend to think of status as almost like a linear scale where you're higher or lower than everybody else.
But how do you think the sort of the younger generations are sort of motivated by different status symbols? Health and fitness, I think, is like a big one actually. Now, and that's you made me think of it when I was listening. Partly because I was listening to the book on a run, perhaps. But I remember my rugby coach saying the problem is with you, McLaughlin, is you're only interested in it when people are watching and da 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 da. And it made me think that actually. Maybe at a point, maybe he's trying to wind me up and get a reaction, probably likely. But was that now, it's like, thanks to the wonders of Strava, doesn't matter, I can tell everyone about it. I can go for a run on my own, but I can upload it to Strava afterwards and tell the whole world. And it's like, it is that, you know, it has kind of like impacted that sort of, identity, status, etc.
But it's kind of absorbed lots of things. So, you know, you go out and you have a nice dinner and part of you is going, oh, should I photograph this and put it on my Instagram?
Yeah.
It's like, well, you could just eat it. It's a nice dinner. You could just enjoy it with the people that are actually in the room. But there is always a little. Well, I mean, I'd certainly for me, I don't. Everybody gets this, but I think I'm not the only person. There's a part of you that is a content creator.
Yeah.
And as soon as you have a social media presence, it's like, okay, but so what am I going to put on this to make this an enjoyable, interesting, engaging feed? Now, maybe I overthink this because I used to do stand-up comedy, and that I think is similar in the sense that you have like a public persona and a private personality.
Yeah.
And the two overlap, but they're not the same. So in stand-up, even when people are talking about themselves on stage and saying, you know, things that happen to them in their life, it's a performed version of your life, and it's obviously edited, and you know, you obviously leave things out that are really personal. Well, I certainly did. They're really personal, and you shape the story so that it's entertaining and that kind of thing. So you have like a public version of yourself, and maybe I just transferred that over into social media. So there's a public persona of my life, which is, you know, made up of things like this morning I got loads of plums off the tree in my garden, so my Instagram feed is treated to a very large bowl of plums, which I'm sure nobody cares about at all.
Yeah.
But I did not, you know, include the weeds and the pile of snails in the corner and the old bucket and the other things in the garden.
But it's true, and it varies from platform to platform as well. That's the other thing, right? Is your persona and identity sort of. Yeah, we do a lot on LinkedIn, obviously, jobs podcast, but yeah, it's like, yeah, you do have a bit of a different persona there than you do on other platforms.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like there's a genre. There's a you know, the Twitter X genre is, well, I still think, you know, it should be thoughtful observations about the world, witty aphorisms, and really stupid puns. That's what I go for. I don't know if I should probably be more angry these days, but I can't quite bring myself to go there.
But it does. I mean, that's the big criticism, isn't it? Particularly in sort of we're in the sort of grand finale of elections with 2024. That it just leads people to be angrier and more kind of shocking with it, right? I've found that with Twitter over the last few months. Like, it's doing that thing now of where it only pushes it to 200 people, and if 10 people haven't liked it, then it just doesn't go any further, right? So it just leans you towards being sort of really outlandish, and it's a bit like the the sort of pub bore at the end of the bar, like, has now found all the other pub bores at the end of the bar across the land, and it's like they're all culminating.
Shouting at each
yeah,
other.
exactly. They've all found each other, and it just makes for quite a sort of loud, intense experience on any of these platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think there's a couple of things there. One of them is just that, because they want engagement, they want people to keep going back. The algorithms do kind of push the things that get big engagement, as well as obviously just the natural thing of more people feel strongly about it, more people will share it. But the other thing is, to go back to the status identity thing, that if one of the things you're doing there is building your persona on that platform, then you don't build a very strong character if you're constantly reasonable and listening to other points of view. If you're
Yeah.
if somebody engages you and says, "Oh, but what about this?" and you go, "Oh, yeah, no, that's a very good point. I hadn't thought of that. Maybe I'm wrong on this." It's not a very strong persona. So the natural tendency is, in fact, to build a particular persona identity and then to defend it.
Yeah.
And especially if it's a kind of a group identity where you found your allies and your buddies on the platform, and you're all liking and retweeting each other or whatever. And then at that point to go, "Oh, actually, no, maybe I was wrong about this. Maybe I've changed my mind," is quite risky, because then all your tribe are going to go, "What? No, that's not the line. No, the line is this. Like,
Yeah.
okay, you're out now. We're going to ostracize you."
Yeah.
And you don't want to do that. So I think in that sense, the identity thing, the persona thing, encourages people to double down and dig in and take polarized positions. Whereas if people always say this, but I think it's true, that if you met those same people in person in a pub, you could have a perfectly civilized, reasonable disagreement and still buy each other a drink.
Do you think it will change?
I don't know. I mean, I hope so, obviously, because I think it's important to have public spaces where we can disagree constructively. And at the moment, a lot of those spaces are online.
Yeah.
And if we don't have places online where you can have a good argument, but in good faith, and be willing to listen and change your mind, then I'm not sure where that can happen anymore. And I think it's really important for democracy. I think that there are places where that can happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I just think we just sort of started to become so sort of angry and derogatory about our politicians. I thought the other night with the BBC debate, the chap that got up and said, "Are you two the best that both parties can offer?" I was just like, I sort of thought, gosh, like, that's just, A, it's quite rude. B, how and what is he expected? How can they answer? What is the answer that he's kind of expecting them to sort of give? And then finally, I was just like, I'm a Tory through and through, and so on. But I was like, I can recognise that, Starmer is hardworking, intelligent, etc. And they both are. And one's the son of factory workers, the other's the son of immigrants. And do you know what? It's not that bad of a choice, particularly when you look at what America's got at the moment. Like, I kind of thought, gosh, but like that didn't really get that much sort of pickup. Again, everyone was like, "Oh, he stole the show. Why can't Roger be Prime Minister instead?" And I thought, what? Just got up and just like gratuitously rude about them both. I don't know. I thought it was like an interesting moment.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, because I do take your point, and interesting because I often do things like Politics Live or radio things. I will often, I'll get that few minutes with working politicians like beforehand in the corridor, and I'm always really struck by the difference between, in the corridor, people across parties who will be talking to each other. Not only will they be polite, but they will often be saying, "Oh, are you still working on that thing about housing? Yeah, no, I'm interested in that. We should talk, because we could probably do something in the committee about that." So they're really working across party lines to try and get good things done. And then as soon as the cameras and microphones go on, they've just got their list of bullet points, and they're just trying to score points off each other. And I often sit there thinking, well, it's no wonder the public don't trust you and don't rate you now, because if you were a bit more like I just heard you, they would get a sense of the fact, because I do genuinely believe most politicians don't go into politics with a lust for money and power. they actually want to make a difference.
Yeah.
And they work really hard, and they get a lot of flack. So I actually, on the whole, I have a lot of respect for politicians, even when I completely disagree with them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think the state of politics, like what the parties have to offer, is in a very poor state. And I think a lot of people genuinely feel like Roger, well, you're just not taking the electorate seriously. You don't have much to offer us. You never listen to us. You don't care about what we are concerned about. And when we do try to say we're concerned about this, half the time you dismiss us as ignorant bigots.
Yeah.
And so I kind of have sympathy from both sides, if you like, if that's not too centrist. Because I do generally think, as individuals, I think most politicians are motivated by wanting to make a difference.
Yeah.
And even if they then get completely sucked into the party sausage machine and forget that they ever had ideals and principles because they're too busy trying to kind of stay on the skateboard of a political career, I do think that's what motivates them, and they work really hard. But I also think that the political system at the moment, there's a huge gulf between most of those politicians and most of us who vote for them.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, by the time this goes out, we will have had a very, very interesting election.
One where we'll probably have possibly 4 or 5 parties now, and that's again that is one of those things where it's like that's been quite a subtle change that I don't think we've sort of really picked up on in the last sort of. I mean, I know we had the coalition government, so that was obviously then sort of we were like, okay, well, it is 3 parties properly. So, what advice would you give to someone who looks at your career and thinks, I want to do that? Because I think it's really interesting how you've combined all these different things. Like, I suppose an interesting question genuinely is what's the most lucrative of it, and how's that changed in the 20 years? Because my understanding of writing books now is that that's pretty hard work to make money via that, etc. So perhaps that's almost an easier question to answer than the recommendation to people. But
okay, well, let's start with that. That has definitely changed. I would have said 20 years ago most of my money came from writing journalism, essentially.
Yeah.
And I was writing for the broadsheets and magazines, and mostly features like motoring, travel and motorbikes, and then moved into technology, that kind of thing. And then, in fact, what happened was there was a big... and actually, I suppose I was starting to do what's called science communication, where you basically train scientists and engineers to communicate what they do to the public better. And because I came from the kind of performance and writing background, I had those skills, and then I was able to, just about understood what they say and go, okay, well, why don't you try this? So that was a big chunk of my work for a while. And then the financial crash happened, and most of the journalism outlets that I used to write for basically made the people that used to commission me redundant. And so that part of my work really disappeared. But luckily, I was doing the other things. I was doing training and communication and live event stuff.
Yeah.
And now the live events are probably the backbone of my income. I still do the written journalism. Radio is nice, doesn't pay massively, but kind of ticks over. Books, I've been lucky with this second book because I've got a good agent, basically. But yes, on the whole, it's rash to assume that a book will pay you a decent hourly rate for the time it takes you to write it, unless you are simply turning what you already know into a book with minimal extra effort. But certainly this one, where I was travelling around the world talking to people and going down rabbit holes of research, it took many hours. But actually, that does kind of lead to some useful advice, because my career is quite random, really. I have just followed... When I first left college, having done a film and theatre and art degree, I worked in technical theatre. I used to go on tour with theatre companies, doing the lighting, sound, that kind of stuff. And then I slid from that into trying to perform with a circus, where I really wanted to be a trapeze artist. But the more I pointed my toes, the more people would laugh. And I had to just eventually accept that because I was always the kid that was useless at PE at school. I had no aptitude at all. I mean, it was like, if a career advisor, like trapeze artists would be absolutely the thing they would warn me against. And after a couple of years, I accepted this, and I thought, well, if people are going to laugh at me, I'll just go to comedy. So I did that, and then I kind of got into the journalism accidentally through that, because I thought, well, if I'm writing jokes, I can write. So yeah, it's been a kind of, oh well, this has come along now, I'll do a bit of this. The advantage of that has been that I've always had several different things on the go at the same time. I think they call that a portfolio career now.
Yes.
And that means that when something happens, like there's a financial crash and all the newspapers get rid of the people that used to hire you, you can just move across and expand other things that you do. Whereas, you know, I had very sensible relatives who had worked for the same company for 20 years doing the same job, and they got made redundant, and there were no other companies near there where they lived doing the same thing. They could not get another job. They were just absolutely stuffed. So actually having a number of different things on the go is helpful if you're prepared to be flexible and go, okay, right, well, that's drying up, I'll move to this. But conversely, it helps to have a niche of something you're genuinely interested in and know quite a lot about.
Yeah.
So although I do written journalism, radio, books, live events, a lot of what I do is around the same sort of theme, which is how technology and society mesh together.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of use the same area of knowledge in different formats without having to go and become an expert in something completely new for a different format. So I guess that they would be my two genuine pieces of advice, would be diversify, you know, keep a few irons in the fire so that if one thing suddenly disappears, as it may do. I mean, for example, again, you know, during COVID, obviously all the live events just stopped. And although I did a couple of online ones, it by no means replaced the income.
Yeah.
And nobody foresaw that. But conversely, yeah, if you get a niche or maybe a couple of niches of things you're genuinely interested in that you can get to know quite a lot about, then you can use that in different formats and different directions.
Yeah. No, I think that is good advice.
I mean, that's kind of what you did, isn't it, really? I mean...
Yes.
Moving from being a political advisor to podcasting about the thing that you are interested in and know a lot about.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it's... Although I did sort of start out thinking I might find a job through the podcast, I still think this is my quest to find a job for myself one day. But
hire this man, get him out of the house. He's sitting there in his socks. He hasn't put his shoes on for a week.
Honestly, but it's yeah, and I do sort of think, like, you know, what is a job, sort of more fundamentally as well, right? I think it's this stuff is really sort of interesting for it, but also it's like having variety as well matters enormously, and also I was massively wrapped up with the identity thing as well, because I've been for 3 years, I've been Jimmy from Number 10, right? Like, and everyone knew what that was, and everyone sort of had an idea of what I did, and if they didn't, they were still very impressed by it, and so on, and like it just and so it was a real kind of like, there was definitely a kind of identity sort of, I wouldn't say grieving, but it was like, my gosh, it's this is a bit of a reorientation process, and it's hardly like it came from the blue working with Theresa May, right? Like, you know, it was just sort of like, so yeah, it's kind of it's strange.
It's different. I definitely think that's true. I mean, I would be interested to know how much that's changing. When people say that younger people are less identified with their jobs, that they don't see their work life always as being so defining of who they are, and that the kind of, there's more of an interest in maybe work-life balance, and I wonder how true that is, that maybe who you are is not all about what job you do, but I think that kind of flexibility, that is quite a new
thing.
I think it's quite a new thing. I mean, I know the kind of jobs for life thing probably, in a sense, was a blip in the middle of the last century. But I think identifying who you were by where you lived, who your family was, and what your job was, or what your occupation was, even, was a pretty normal, settled thing for most people, say 100 years ago, that they didn't need to ask themselves who they were because they were so-and-so who was so-and-so's kid who was married to so-and-so, lived in this part of the town, which would already tell you quite a lot about who they were, did this for a job, so you probably knew where they worked. So you could place somebody within their community, within their society. And I don't think that's really the same now. So maybe that's why, actually, if you are somebody like you and like me, for whom work is really important, that is quite important, because that is how we tell people who we are.
Yes, but I think that's also why a lot of the book chimed with me in terms of digital identity and so on, of like constantly putting oneself out there, because, and I remember thinking when COVID hit a few months after I'd left Number 10, I was like, people are just going to forget who you are. Like, you've got to do something, and that was partly the podcast, right? It was like being at home and fidgety and just thinking, gosh, like I can't carry on with this. So there was that element to it, but it's, that sort of, and trying to explain what you do as well. I think that's where you're quite good at it as well. Like you've sort of got the traditional verticals of writer, broadcaster, and so on, whereas I sort of don't have those. I tell you one of the things you were just saying about, like, for younger people, work being less important to them. One of my theories on this is it's how dating apps have changed things. And so going back to when I started in the working world, not that long ago, 15 years ago, still longer than, creeps up on you. But when I started, you would go out on Thursday night with all of your colleagues, and that was partly because you would hope that the sort of pretty girl from accounts was going to be there or whatever. And the difference is now is it's so much easier to sort of set up a date on a Thursday night. You don't have to go to the printer to print off your Google Maps to find the directions to the place. That it's made it a much more, people can leave, and again, it's easier to meet up with their friends from university or whatever, in a way, again, that it wasn't. Whereas because you were at work all day, you were sort of rooted to go out with those people kind of in the evenings. So it's one of those things where dating apps has kind of changed it, is my sort of theory.
No, that's actually, it's a really interesting, I hadn't thought of it quite that way, but I think you're right that your social life is not necessarily revolving around work in the same way. And even beyond dating, if a lot of your friends are on Facebook or other social media things and you're staying in touch by WhatsApp, it doesn't matter so much that they're not the people you're working with every day, because you can still be in touch with them 8 times a day through your devices. So actually, the idea that you have a social life that's centered on where you work or where you live or your school or whatever, again, is probably much looser, because you can have a number of social circles.
Exactly.
And
have a slightly different identity with each of those social circles as well within them.
Well, until they all find you on the same social media platform.
Yes.
Start exchanging notes on what you were like at school.
That's true. One of the phrases that I'd heard you use, not in the book, but I loved, was backronym. Can you explain this to us?
You see, I knew this. When I wrote the big data book, I thought, okay, it's not, I have looked into it enough to find it's not just lots of data. There is more to it than that. But how can I pull this together in some memorable way? And so I thought, okay, what I need is a backronym, so that I could, and I did actually, so backronym is an acronym, but you reverse engineer it so that you get the word that you wanted to start with. So in this case, data. So I could just go big data, DATA. It's lots of dimensions. It's collected automatically. It has a time element and it's processed by AI. But the funny thing is, whenever I do a talk and I go, okay, right, so what is big data? It's not just large data, it's these other things. And I've come up with a backronym. And I'll always say to the audience, so do you all know what a backronym is? And I'm surprised how few people do, actually. And I like, okay, I can guarantee you this is the only thing you're going to remember from this talk in 6 months' time is the word backronym. And boy, am I right. Even you see, it's the only thing you remember.
It is funny. I thought it was great. It's used by so many presenters, the tactic to kind of like around it. Yeah.
But ironically, you see, you probably forgot all the things that DATA stands for. You just remember the word backronym. What I need now is I need to turn backronym into a backronym so that it will BACKRONYM will encompass everything I know about the world. And then my life will be complete, and I could just set that on loop on the internet and go and retire to the Bahamas.
But it is one of those, you do need, I mean, you made me think about it, but sort of coming up with a phrase or something that you can be associated with is going to become a bigger thing in our world of thought leadership. Use that sort of, but people will know where I'm coming from. But in that sense of being able to come up with something, like one of my friends, James, came up with the red wall phrase, right? And that's that's just, just completely become part of our political culture. It probably even stretched beyond just political culture, frankly. And so being able to come up with that sort of pithy thing that you are known for, that kind of like sums up your own manifesto or whatever it is becoming important. That's communication broadly, right?
So Salman Rushdie, award-winning novelist and free speech martyr, mainly known for Naughty But Nice, selling cream cakes. No, you are right though, and that is, I mean, there's partly that kind of cynical thing of you need something that sticks, that can become a meme, that is easy to spread in our era of 15-second bites of content. But the other thing is, it does actually, if you want to communicate something, you need to help people remember it.
Yeah.
And in a world of ever so many distractions. And so if you can give them a hook to hang it on, I mean, that's why stories are so important and useful. My mother, when she was alive, she was a storyteller. It was her job. And she always used to say, like, people will, if I tell people stories, people will remember the story, but I can give them information and it will just it won't stick, it'll go. But if I tell them the story, they will remember the story because, that takes them on a little emotional journey. So they'll remember the feelings, and then that will help them hang on to the information. So I always remember that, because especially, I mean, if I'm writing about things like data and technology and algorithms, they're quite abstract.
Yes.
If I'm trying to explain to somebody what, principal component analysis is, say, that's really abstract maths. So it's much easier if you can come up with a story that's like, well, how did we first come up with this concept? It was this person in this era of history needed a way of understanding this, and so they came up with this technique, and here it is. And then afterwards you might forget the technical term and you might forget the details of how it works, but you'll remember that somebody needed a way to organise information in this way, and they came up with this method, and this is what we have.
Yeah, that's really true. You mentioned your mum was a storyteller. What did your parents do?
Well, she was a storyteller. She went off when I was probably a teenager and studied at the Lecoq School in Paris, which she was there. I think she was the year above Théâtre de Complicité, in fact. She was there at the same time as them. And then she came back and she worked as a storyteller, partly because that was something she could do on her own. She didn't need to get a bunch of people together and start a company. And my dad, who started off with a proper job, in industry. Well, first of all, when I was born, he was a trainee docks manager. It was when British Transport included trains and docks. So he was a trainee docks manager. And then he basically got headhunted by someone he'd known at university who was starting an engineering company, and got him in to be sales. So he was sales director of this water processing company. I always used to tell my school friends that he was in sewage. But he also did. I mean, he used to go when I was little. He used to go to the Middle East and talk to governments of Saudi Arabia about massive desalination plants and stuff. But it really wasn't him. He didn't enjoy it at all. So he left and became a puppeteer, and he worked very happily as a puppeteer for 25 years until he retired.
Amazing.
So at one point, when I had a proper stage management job, I was much the most respectable one of the family in terms of employment. Like, I had a weekly pay packet.
Yeah.
I was employed. That all went wrong, obviously.
Yeah. How funny. And of course you wanted to join the circus as well.
Yes.
We probably came from that as well. Who else do you think has had an interesting career? Like in terms of like a pass the mic section, who else should we go and have a chat with?
Oh, that's a very good question.
Because I genuinely, I remember sort of coming when how the origin story of this particular podcast interview came. We did Times Radio together. It must have been about a year. I looked at your website because it's always interesting to see who goes on. Saw the Lapsed Comedian and thought, gosh, that's interesting. It's like we should definitely have her on to chat at some point. And then I saw you got the book out, so I was like, okay, well, let's use that as a kind of like trigger for it. But yeah, like who else do you think has sort of got an interesting kind of portfolio career?
Man, you really put me on the spot here now.
Yeah, sorry, I should have flagged that before.
I mean, the performance overlap thing is quite interesting because although some people do like my dad, I suppose, I have a sensible job, but actually I'm not happy and I'm not fulfilled and I've always wanted to act secretly, and so I'm now going to leave and become a puppeteer. I think quite a lot of comedians almost go the other way, or, you know, they do comedy for a while and then they decide that they don't want to spend the rest of their life driving around the country to shout at students who've never bought their own washing powder for half an hour.
I asked Jeff Norcott what his job was when he came on, and he was like, driving, mainly.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I literally... So I thought, when I took a show to Edinburgh with Matt Parker, who's a stand-up mathematician, and actually, you should talk to him. He's really interesting, because he started out doing supply... Well, he started as a maths teacher, then did supply maths teaching, and then got more and more into doing comedy, and now he does all sorts of maths communication things. He's a superstar on YouTube. Used to be really funny. So we did a show together at Edinburgh called Your Days Are Numbered, The Maths of Death, which was a surprise hit, certainly a surprise to us. And then we toured the UK with it. We took it to Australia. And we used to walk around the streets and people would stop him because of his YouTube maths videos. People would stop him and say, "You're Matt Parker. You know, will you give me your autograph?" And they would get him to autograph their calculator. And he would say, "Would you like it in English or in binary?" And, and I'm standing there going, this is a whole world of internet-mediated stardom that I can only watch in awe. So you should talk to him. He's really fun. And he also has a book out about the joy of triangles.
Oh, great, yeah.
So sorry, I got a bit sidetracked then. People.
Well, just interesting
people. So when we did the show in Edinburgh together, I thought at that point, maybe I should go back into actually just gigging and doing stand-up the whole time. And then I was talking to him about it because he was kind of doing that. And he was like, yes, so I drive to Bath and I do 10 minutes and then I drive home again. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember all that. Drive to Newcastle, do half an hour, drive home again. I just don't think I have the stamina for that anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm not. But quite a lot of comics, I think, who do it for a while, and obviously some people, they become big enough, they can do big tours, they go on television, they do game shows, all that kind of thing. It still works for them. But I think there's other people that go, you know what, this is fine, but I don't want to do this the rest of my life. And maybe I'll go and do something else. Maybe I'll just go and... Because a lot of people, did have... I never had a sensible job. So it was never a dilemma for me. But some of them were like lawyers and GPs and brain scientists. And at some point I had to decide, am I going to give that up or go and do something else?
And then it feels like we can't do an interview with a scientist, data geek, without talking slightly about AI. But there was a bit in the book that really made me think interestingly about it, in the way that Greek slaves allowed people to think about philosophy
Yes.
and just what AI might do for us and what jobs it might take away, and just what do you think the world will look like in 15, 20 years when AI has taken more of a hold, or AGI?
Oh, okay. I don't think it's going to be AGI. They're not in the sense of human-like
Yeah.
intelligence. I don't think we're anywhere near that. But I think it will be very impressive, narrow AI that is very good at particular things. I mean, there's two questions. It's kind of as like, what do I think it will look like, and what do I think it should look like?
Yes.
What it should look like is we should use AI to do the things it's really, really good at, like processing massive amounts of data and finding patterns, and I mean things like looking at medical scans and
Yeah.
comparing them with other medical scans and going, you should look at this one. There's something fishy about this, and monitoring systems, which it actually kind of already does. Most of the really good stuff.
This is the thing, isn't it?
What people don't know about. So things like digital oil fields, right? For years and years, there's been monitoring devices all over things like oil fields, like monitoring the flow of fuel and pressure and so on. And so, like long before a problem really becomes a big problem, automated systems can go, oh, there's a sudden pressure drop in this pipe, get someone over there quick. There's obviously something going wrong. And you can head off problems. Or even, I mean, one of my favourite examples is the Rolls-Royce aero engines that have so many sensors on, not just like pressure and temperature, but things like a magnet that will monitor how many metallic particles are in the lubricant. So you can tell if the metal is wearing quicker than it should, or the patterns of vibration. You can literally map them against what other aircraft engines have done. And that means that you can, and they all go back to Rolls-Royce's data centre. So Rolls-Royce is monitoring all of the engines all over the world and going, well, actually, this one's not doing what it should at this point in its life. Let's alert the airline, and the airline can say, oh, well, that aircraft will be on the ground in 2 days' time in this airport, so you can get an engineer there with the parts, and you can, all that stuff has been happening for ages, and that's brilliant, and that is, it's improving all the time, and things like the machine learning models make all that even better. And that's what I get excited about, not just because I'm a massive nerd, but also because like that can really do things that humans can't do, or can't do that fast, can't do that well. But what we shouldn't be using it for is to like write music, and do essays for people at universities, because it's like the point of that is that humans do it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's pointless. It's like the point of you writing an essay at university is for you to think and to find out what you know about something, and for your tutor to find out what you know about something, so that you can learn something. Like if you're going to get ChatGPT to do it, you're basically taking out student loan for absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Although, maybe you are anyway, who knows, but yeah, so that's what I would like, would be that you actually go, what is this stuff really good at that we're not good at? Get it to do that. But at the moment, it seems that people are just, I mean, this is one of the themes of the book, is that it's not that technology is taking over from us, it's that we're having a massive crisis of our ability to do anything.
Yeah.
And so you see a big shiny machine and go, oh, well, I'll let the machine do it. And then also I'm not responsible for it. And I don't have to do it. And that's such a mistake. I think such a mistake.
Yeah.
Because then we really are losing our agency if we say, let them. And I have to actually, you were saying earlier about how many people are humanities graduates in the media, but also in politics.
Yes.
I genuinely think one of the problems is that, and I'm one of these people, humanities graduates, look at AI, go, that's terribly clever, I don't understand it. And the more clever those people are, the more they've got like a first from Cambridge in history or something, the more inclined they are to think, well, I'm terribly clever, and if I don't understand it, it must be really clever.
Yeah.
So let's let the machines make the decisions. It's like, mate, you may be really clever at history, but just because you don't understand how this computer program works doesn't mean it's cleverer than you.
Yeah.
Certainly doesn't mean it's cleverer than you in seeing the shape of human history, one would hope.
Yeah.
But, if we are in this massive crisis of cultural self-confidence, I think that's what people do. They go, oh no, I've got a first in history, and yet I still have no clue what's going on in the world. Help, help. Bring in the machines.
Yeah, a crisis of self-confidence though. Yeah, I think but it's true. And I think it's probably going to get worse as well, actually, to your point. Overall about digital identities and people, well, not just digital identities generally, but it's, it's going to become a bigger and bigger problem.
It's a cheery note to end on, isn't it?
Yeah, it is right. Well, I'll tell you one of the things that we have done. You will see here in the corner, we've done some Jimmy's Jobs live events where we bring a mix of kind of comedy and business and so on. So I'd love you to come and do one of those later on in the year or something.
That'd be cool.
It's like we have like a bit of comedy at the top, and then we go into some interviews, and they've worked really well. It's like trying to make business a bit more sort of fun, basically. Like corporate events can be quite stuffy, and actually you get some comedians on, they really set people up quite well for it. So yeah, we'd love you to do.
And you leveraging your comedy training.
Yes, I mean I did, like, it's quite, when we did it, it's to your point about like it forces you on the day. I remember thinking, oh no, I haven't really got anything to say that's new tonight, etc. And actually, because it's not part of my process, I sat down, I did clear my diary the day of it, because I thought I don't want to sort of go through too much mental cognition throughout the day. But I sat down and wrote some jokes, and actually loads of funny stuff came to me, and it was like and that's partly why I want to do them more, because it sort of force you to sort of do it. And I mean, you'll know far better than I, but you've got to do like 50 gigs to sort of even kind of get your most basic rookie kind of badge, right?
Well, I mean, it does actually. It varies between people. Some people pick it up really quickly, and I think maybe also are lucky with the gigs, and some people plug away for ages.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you can only learn by doing it, because there'll be the thing that always works that suddenly doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then you have to think, oh, okay, why didn't that work with that audience on that night? And also, what am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
Because the great thing about stand-up is that it's just, which is also the terrifying thing, but it's just you up there, and there's no one else who can sort things out.
Yeah.
If it goes wrong with the audience, you have to fix it. There's no one else there.
Yeah.
Which is terrifying, but also just a brilliant way to learn.
Completely.
And you learn that it's a relationship with an audience, and it's different every time. But you're the one that has to take the lead. You're the one that has to fix it. If the atmosphere suddenly goes frosty and they're all staring at you like they hate you, you're the one that has to find a way out of that hole, and get them at least back on your side. Once you've learned that you can do that, and that there are ways to do that, it's very liberating. It means that after that, if you go on stage to do a talk about how computers work, like, well, I'm worried that I don't understand how computers work, but I'm not worried about being on a stage.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's made me a lot more I was a pretty confident presenter anyway, but like it's having that. But it's funny. Again, I'm probably gonna have to change this, but the line I get up with now is like, "My name's Jimmy McLaughlin. I used to advise the Prime Minister." Up until 18 months ago, it was a really impressive line. Now it requires a bit more qualification. That always, you can imagine, that always does well, but might have to change that when it changes again. But yeah, it's. I think it's funny, and we had Matt Richardson, the comedian, on it, and he was saying, to our point about like how it's become much easier to see your old social friends and stuff like that. Like he was saying, he thinks live comedy is in the strongest place that it's ever been, because you've got all these mini clubs that are popping up, and there's a real kind of demand for it and stuff. So yeah, it kind of that was a bit more of a positive sort of end to it. And yeah, and it is true that I see it in lots of the pubs around here as well. That they're all kind of putting on their own comedy nights now. And
well, I walked past the Bedford,
yeah,
which was It was a wonderful place to perform.
Completely.
Like one of my favourites.
Yeah, yeah. Did you perform in the big club room there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
Really extraordinary.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that. I have noticed that there is definitely, after COVID, I think people remembered why it's important to do things together in person. It was almost like we just took it for granted. And then when you took it away, we realised what we were missing.
Yeah, completely.
I mean, to go back to your point about, 30 years ago, how would you have done COVID? We wouldn't have had lockdowns, is the answer. We simply wouldn't have had, because so many things would have been impossible.
Yeah.
We would have...
You couldn't have worked from home, really.
No, exactly. We would have... Things would either have stopped or they would have carried on, taking risk into account. But that said, also, I think our society's attitude to risk has changed radically in the last 30 years, which is hopefully the next book. So maybe I'll come back in 5 years' time and talk about that.
I'm excited to hear that. What's that going to be? I think there is a great thing. You will probably end up including this in the book, but it's sort of, I'm going to get this wrong now, but it's like the 1953 Farnborough Air Show, and there's a terrible crash, and it sort of kills 50 of the crowd.
The audience.
Yeah. And they carry on with the air show.
Amazing.
Like, because it was just sort of aftermath of World War II. It's just not, and you think now. I mean, it just probably for the better, but it's like it's just an extraordinary kind of, you just can't carry on with it. It's. So presumably the point is that people have got more sensitive to risk, right?
I think it's a mixture of things. I mean, I think as a society, we have become more focused on risk or on safety, depending which way you look at it, and that and individual response to risk are connected. I just think it's become a kind of a moral thing, that avoiding risk has become implicitly a moral good, and I don't think that was always the case. And obviously there are exceptions, and interestingly, if you talk to people in business, they will mostly say, well, you have to take risks. I mean, you cannot have a business world without taking risks. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
But in other contexts, people will say, no, you shouldn't have any risks at all. So is the idea of the I can't remember the exact phrase. There's a policy that originates in Scandinavia, which that you should aim to have 0 fatalities from road accidents.
Yeah.
And this is something to aim towards. And they're actually, in practice, it's reasonably sensible. They're not saying, you shouldn't drive anywhere. But you can see that if you set that up, if you say that like the only acceptable level of risk is 0 risk, then you do effectively say, and therefore actually all these other things are dispensable, and you can just do away with them. Now, in practice, nobody actually lives like that.
If you were on a game show and there were 3 doors, behind the first one is the birthday paradox, behind the second one is the 4-colour theorem, and the third is Gabrielle's Born, which would you choose?
Well, it depends. Do I get to stick with the one I chose, or are you going to then open one of the other doors and show me a goat and offer me the chance to choose again?
Possibly, yes.
I really like the 4-colour problem, partly because when I was studying maths with the Open University, I went into an art shop and used my student card to buy some cheap art materials, and the woman at the counter said, "Oh, what are you studying?" And I felt a bit defensive because I was actually studying maths, not art at all. And I said, "Oh, I'm studying maths," but then I started explaining to her the 4-colour problem and colouring maps and colouring countries in different colours without having any adjoining borders the same colour, and she was absolutely amazed that that sort of thing was part of maths. So I went out going, I've proselytised the joys of maths and got some cheap art materials, so everybody's a winner.
Brilliant. And one of the bits early on in the book is around sort of when women are allowed to wear trousers.
Oh, yeah.
And so on. And it just struck me, I couldn't, because often now that I'm sort of approaching 40, I look back and think, gosh, that's a lot closer to when I was born than I was thinking. But there's one women were not allowed to wear trousers on the floor of the U.S. Senate till 1993.
I know. There's some amazing stuff about. I'm sometimes amazed by how much the world has changed within our lifetimes. And that was one of the things that really surprised me. But also because some American Attorney General had, back in the 1920s, literally ruled that women were allowed to wear trousers wherever they liked.
Yeah.
And yet they ignored this. So Elizabeth Anscombe, who's a very famous philosopher, was turned away from a restaurant in North America for wearing trousers. They said, sorry, we don't admit women wearing trousers. And so she went round the corner and she took the trousers off. She apparently used to wear smocks, so she'd be like, not just kind of standing in her pants. And so she went back and saying, well, no, I'm not wearing trousers now, so you have to let me in. It's like,